The next section, page 162, is talking about something called linkage groups. And they go into a lot of detail about what linkage groups are. But the main point of the whole thing is if the genes are on the same chromosome, they're said to be linked. And they get into some details about crossing over. And so I'll just remind y'all about what crossing over is. So remember, if you got your homologous chromosomes that are side by side during synapsis and meiosis, they're side by side. So you know that they can exchange genetic material. The DNA can cross over and break. So you can end up with something like this. Or part of the father's genes chromosome is on the end of the mother's and vice versa. Okay? So crossing over always occurs between genes on the same chromosome. The closer together the genes are, the less likely a crossover will occur between them. The farther apart they are, the more likely it is. So if I'll give you an example. I think you can just see it, physically see it. Let's say you've got genes that are on totally opposite ends of the chromosome. It's very likely that crossing over will occur between those that are far apart. On the other hand, if you've got genes that are very close together, it's just a mathematical thing. If they're right beside each other, very unlikely that crossing over is going to separate those genes that are linked. Okay, being on the same chromosome is linked, and you can do crossing over studies to see whether they're far apart or close together. So that's what they did to begin with when they started mapping the chromosomes to understand what's related, what's close to what, is by looking at linkage and crossing over experiments. And they used organisms to study that way back in the back, long time ago. And the organism that was the most popular for learning about linkage groups was an organism called the fruit fly. It's got a scientific name, Drosophila. So this thing has a very fast lifespan. It goes through its lifespan quickly, and it reproduces. It has hundreds and hundreds of babies, lays lots of eggs. So they studied fruit flies to learn how to map chromosomes. Because, you can't do genetic experiments with humans. You can't put us together and say, okay, you got a mate. Plus our lifespan is so long, it takes a while to see results. So when they started studying linkage and how chromosomes are on the same chromosome, genes are on the same chromosome, they use these flies as a tool. And that's a fun thing you can do if you go on to a university and you study genetics. You do fruit fly experiments, and they're really cool because you can see the actual genetic results of when you mate together two different kinds of flies. So they get into a lot of detail about the distance between genes on a chromosome. But really and truly, when you talk about linkage, now you're not talking about independent assortment. Right? Independent assortment means they're on different chromosomes. Now you've got dependent assortment because they're on the same chromosome. Sometimes the genes always go together, depending on how close they are to each other. Okay. The next section, page 163, is talking about genes and the environment. So you may have genes for something that are not actually expressed in you because of your environment. And they give some examples, but I like a different example. So talking about genes and the environment. People will say things like, well, you might have the genes to be very intelligent, but if your family doesn't encourage you, you may not reach your potential. So you've got a potential, and hopefully if you've got children, you can encourage them to reach their potential, especially if they ask you questions. Either answer them or tell them how to find out the answer. So you can encourage reaching the potential, okay? And the environment has something to do with whether you do that, okay? So I've got a couple examples of environment and how that affects expression of genes. Siamese cats. I like cats. Puppies. You know how Siamese cats have that dark color on the tips of their ears and the bottom of their feet and the tip of their tail, and the rest of the body is kind of a light color? The reason for that is wherever the body is cooler, the black gene works. And where the body is warmer, it doesn't. Okay, so the warm part of that Siamese cat's body is whitish, and the cool ends of the tail and the ears are black. And they show the same thing there with a rabbit. You can do a little experiment with this rabbit. And you can make it change colors in its fur. I don't know if you can do that with Siamese cat, but you can do it with these rabbits. So that's an example of how the environment affects the gene. It depends on the temperature. Okay, there's something else that depends on the temperature too that I think is so cute, so cool. Alligator sex genes. Okay, you know how in humans this is female and this is male? That's not true in every organism. There's different ways of determining sex. And with alligators, the mother lays her eggs in a nest. She builds this big nest out of mud and leaves and sticks. She lays her eggs in that nest, and she goes off and leaves them for a while, but she guards them to make sure nobody disturbs it. Well, the eggs that are the warmest are going to develop into males, and the eggs that are the coolest are going to become females. So even though the genes are there for maleness, if they're not warm enough, they won't be male. They'll be female. Female is the default. If they're not warm enough, they'll be female. Now, I say that. I hope I'm not saying it backwards. Could be the other way around, but I think the warm ones are the male ones. And so that's the cool thing about environment. Okay. And then section 10.7 is going back to polygenic again. They don't say it's polygenic, I don't believe. Yes, they do. It really belongs in section 10.6. I just already introduced the idea of polygenic. Okay, they're talking about height and eye color. Anything that occurs across a range, like IQ. I don't know why they separated that from the other variations on dominance, but they did. So anyway, complex variations like height. And they got some real cute pictures there of these students sitting on the bleachers in the football field. And the children are sitting on the bleachers depending on their height. So you see on the left-hand figure, see all the kids wearing blue? The one on the far left is only 5'3". The one on the far right is 6'5". And they sat on the bleachers depending on their height. And you can see, like I was telling you, when you got something polygenic, you'll see this relationship. It's called a bell curve, where the things that are in the center are the most common, and the extremes on either end are the least common. Okay, you see bell curves a lot of times with tests too, where C's are the most common grades. But anyway, they did the same thing on the right-hand side. People wearing red. And the difference between them is, it should be, I think, the red is females and the blue is males. Make sure I'm right about that. Yeah, because you notice the males reach a higher height, 6'5", and the females only make it to 5'11" in this particular group of people. And I think that's what the caption says, but if not, I'll just tell you that. So you can do the same thing. You can do it on a football field. I've seen it done with band members, where they show they just do it the whole group, and they have the girls wear a different color than the boys. And you can make a bell curve like that, depending on your height. The only flaw I see in the drawing is that it uses the English system, but we're all used to 5'3" and 6'9". It doesn't use the metric system, which it would be nice if they would talk about it in terms of meters, or at least to write it below there. So y'all would know that I'm about 1.5 meters tall. And the tallest people that I have in my labs where we check this are usually about 1.9 meters tall. And y'all know, I have basketball players sometimes. I had a guy that was 6'11" in my lab one time. He looked like a whole different species. He was so much bigger than the rest of us. But so you know that there's a range. And that's really polygenic, which means there's lots of genes that contribute to that particular characteristic. Eye color is the same way. So there's a lot of genes that contribute to eye color, and there's a wide range from very light to very dark. And that is inherited, but again, it's lots of genes that cause it, that cause that color. So that's chapter 10. Okay, I wanted to bring it to the end of chapter 10. And then we're going to look a little bit at chapter 11. Chapter 11. Because, we're supposed to cover 10, 11, and 39 by today, and next Monday, and next Wednesday. So we got to get all this stuff covered, but I think we got plenty of time. So chapter 11 is talking about the chromosomes themselves and how the chromosomes are related to inheritance in humans. And so when I think of that chapter, chapter 11, that's what I